The massive hangar bay of Zoria's Stargate thrummed with the controlled chaos of interstellar commerce. Ships of various configurations, from sleek Terran transporters to the crystalline vessels of the Xyler, docked and departed in a carefully orchestrated dance. Captain Eris Thorne guided her mid-sized transport vessel, the Nomad's Fortune, into its designated berth, the magnetic clamps engaging with a satisfying thunk that reverberated through the hull. "Perfect landing, as always," Eris murmured, running a hand through her short, dark hair. A soft whine from beside her pilot's chair drew her attention. "Yes, Bolt, I know. You hate the docking procedures." She reached down to scratch behind the ears of her Belgian Malinois, whose amber eyes watched her with unmistakable intelligence. Bolt wasn't just any dog. The result of careful genetic modification and intensive training, he possessed enhanced cognition, problem-solving abilities, and sensory perception far beyond those of his earthbound ancestors. His muscular frame was lean and powerful, designed for endurance and speed. The modifications were subtle. Terran Confederacy regulations prohibited extreme alterations, but sufficient to make him an invaluable companion in the unpredictable environment of deep space travel. "We'll be here for 3 standard days," Eris continued, speaking to Bolt as she would to any crew member. "Just a routine cargo exchange, refueling, and maybe we'll finally get that stabilizer fixed." Bolt tilted his head, his expression almost thoughtful. "And yes, I know the Zorians are sticklers for their quarantine protocols. We've got all your documentation ready." Zoria's Stargate was renowned throughout the sector for 2 things: its strategic position at the junction of 3 major trade routes, and its maddeningly thorough biosecurity measures. The stations serve as a nexus for dozens of species, many with radically different biologies and immune systems. The Zorians themselves, a reptilian species with 4 keen eyes and an obsession with order, had built their reputation on ensuring that no biological contaminants passed through their jurisdiction. Eris gathered her identification chips and Bolt's certification tags before they made their way down the Nomad's main corridor. The ship was quiet with just the 2 of them aboard. Eris preferred to keep her crew small, taking on temporary help only when absolutely necessary. It meant more work, but also more profit and fewer complications. "Remember," she told Bolt as they approached the airlock, "best behavior. These lizards already think humans are too emotionally attached to their biological companions. Let's not give them more ammunition." Bolt sat at attention, his posture perfect, and gave a single soft bark of acknowledgement. The airlock cycled open to reveal a gleaming, sterile reception area. 2 Zorian customs officials waited, their scaled skin gleaming under the bright lights, all 4 eyes blinking in their characteristic asynchronous pattern. Behind them stood a taller Zorian in the formal blue uniform of the Quarantine Authority. "Captain Eris Thorne, Terran Confederacy merchant vessel Nomad's Fortune," Eris said, stepping forward and offering her identification chip. "Standard cargo delivery and pickup, berth C-17. The first official took her chip with long, nimble fingers and inserted it into a scanning device. "Purpose of visit? Trade. I'm delivering synthesized pharmaceuticals to MedCorp and picking up rare mineral samples for the Terran Geological Institute. Standard procedure, standard answers." The second official's attention had already fixed on Bolt, who sat calmly at Eris's side. All 4 of the Zorians' eyes narrowed simultaneously, a sign of intense focus or suspicion in their species. "You have brought a biological entity with you," the official stated flatly. "Yes, this is Bolt. He's my companion and crew member. I have his documentation here." Eris produced another chip from her jacket pocket. Full biological profile, training certification, vaccination records, and Terran Confederacy service animal registration. The taller Zorian stepped forward, taking the chip from Eris's hand before the other official could reach for it. "I am Inspector Forlag, Chief Quarantine Officer." His voice had the characteristic rasp of all Zorians, but with a precision that suggested authority and education. "I will handle this matter personally." Forlag inserted the chip into his own, more elaborate scanner. Holographic displays flickered to life around him, showing Bolt's biological data in the complex symbolic language of Zorian science. Forlag's upper set of eyes studied the displays while his lower set remained fixed on Bolt. Interesting, the inspector said after a moment. This creature has been modified. Minimally, Eris clarified. Within Terran Confederacy ethical guidelines. Enhanced cognition, sensory perception, and communication capabilities. Nothing that alters his fundamental nature. That, Forlag responded with a dismissive gesture of his hand, is a matter of interpretation. He manipulated the display, zooming in on certain data points. Neurological response indicators exceed standard parameters by 78%. Muscular structure optimized for pursuit and subduing prey. Genetic markers show deliberate manipulation of limbic system regulatory functions. Bolt remained perfectly still, but his ears swiveled forward, tracking the conversation with evident understanding. This did not escape Forlag's notice. Based on these readings, the inspector continued, his tone growing colder. This entity would be classified under Zorian Quarantine Directive 1075 as a high-risk feral organism. Such entities are not permitted in civilian areas of the station. Eris felt her temper flare, but forced herself to remain calm. That's ridiculous. Bolt is not feral by any definition. He's a trained professional companion with over 5 years of active service. He saved my life more times than I can count. Emotional attachment is not relevant to quarantine protocols, Captain Thorne. Forlag's upper eyes blinked in sequence, the Zorian equivalent of dismissive contempt. Our scanners indicate potential for unpredictable aggressive behavior, heightened predatory instincts, and neurological patterns consistent with territorial defense responses. He's not unpredictable, Eris insisted, her voice rising despite her efforts. He's highly trained and disciplined. You're reading data without context. Yes, he has enhanced capabilities, but they're all under conscious control, both his and mine. Bolt, sensing the tension, remained perfectly still but alert, his eyes moving between Eris and Forlag. The dog's controlled response only seemed to intensify Forlag's suspicion. Observe, the inspector said to his colleagues. The creature maintains a state of suppressed predatory alertness. Note the eye movement patterns and the muscle tension in the hindquarters. Classic stalking behavior, merely held in check. Eris stepped partially in front of Bolt, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on the Zorians. This is absurd. I have all the necessary certifications from the Terran Confederacy. Bolt has visited dozens of stations and planets without incident. Terran certification standards are, Forlag paused, choosing his words carefully, inadequate by Zorian measures. They're compromised by emotional bias and anthropomorphic projections. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the intervention of one of the other officials, who whispered something to Forlag. The inspector's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of reluctant concession. However, Forlag continued, given your diplomatic status as a registered Confederacy merchant and the particular sensitivity of relations at present, I am authorized to offer an alternative to immediate quarantine or removal. Eris crossed her arms, waiting. Your companion may undergo an emergency behavioral assessment at our specialized facility. If it passes our protocols, a conditional exception may be granted for the duration of your stay. Forlag made it sound like an extraordinary concession rather than a reasonable compromise. And if I refuse, then you may return to your vessel and depart from Zorian space, or surrender the creature to quarantine facilities until your business is concluded. Forlag's tone made it clear which option he preferred. Eris looked down at Bolt, who met her gaze with steady understanding. She knew they needed this delivery. The penalties for contract failure would be ruinous. And more importantly, the samples she was scheduled to collect were crucial for a research project her sister was conducting back on Earth. Fine, she said finally. We'll do your assessment, but I want to be present the entire time. Forlag's scales rippled in what might have been amusement. That would compromise the objectivity of the process. However, you may observe remotely. He gestured to one of his subordinates. Officer Trelk will escort you both to the assessment center. I will join you shortly to oversee the proceedings. As they follow the younger Zorian through the gleaming corridors of the station, Eris leaned down slightly to murmur to Bolt. Just stay calm and show them what you can do. These reptiles think in binary categories, dangerous or harmless. We need to prove you're neither. Disciplined. Bolt's ears flicked back momentarily in acknowledgement, his stride remaining confident and controlled beside her. The assessment center occupied a secure section of the station's medical wing. Unlike the warm, golden lighting of the public areas, this section was lit with a harsh, blue-white illumination that reminded Eris uncomfortably of a surgical theater. The air carried the faint scent of unfamiliar disinfectants. Officer Trelk guided them into a large, circular room with various equipment stations arranged around its perimeter. The walls were transparent, presumably observation windows. In the center of the room stood a slender figure that Eris immediately recognized as a Xylar. Xylars were among the most unusual sapient species in known space. Their crystalline bodies refracted light in complex patterns, creating a constant, subtle play of colors across their faceted surfaces. They communicated through combinations of light pulses and precisely modulated sound waves that most other species require translation devices to fully comprehend. This particular Xylar wore what appeared to be a specialized interface harness, likely designed to facilitate more direct interaction with non-crystalline life forms. As they approached, the being's body shifted, angling slightly toward them in the Xylar equivalent of a formal greeting. Captain Thorne. The translation device attached to the harness produced a neutral, slightly melodic voice. I am Dr. Kalen, xenoneurobiologist. I will be conducting the assessment of your companion. Doctor, Eris acknowledged with a nod. This is Bolt. He understands complex instructions and has advanced problem-solving capabilities. Kalen's crystalline body pulsed with subtle blue light. Fascinating. I have studied Terran canines, but rarely encounter enhanced specimens. The doctor moved closer, examining Bolt without touching him. The bond between humans and these creatures is quite remarkable, even in their unmodified state. Bolt remained calm under the scrutiny, though his nose twitched slightly at the unfamiliar scent, or perhaps lack of scent, emanating from the crystalline being. The assessment will consist of 3 primary evaluations, Kalen explained, moving toward one of the equipment stations. Threat response, problem-solving under stress, and interspecies social interaction. I will observe neural patterns, biochemical fluctuations, and behavioral indicators throughout. Eris frowned. What exactly are you looking for? The distinction between training and nature, Kalen replied, manipulating controls that cause sections of the floor to reconfigure. Whether your companion's enhanced capabilities are governed by reliable cognitive processes or merely suppressed instinctual responses that could revert under stress. Before Eris could object to this framing, the door slid open to admit Inspector Forlag. The Zorian nodded curtly to Kalen before taking a position near one of the observation windows. You may begin, Doctor, he said, his lower eyes fixed on Bolt. Captain Thorne, please move to the observation area. Kalen indicated a small, raised platform near the wall. Your companion will remain in the central space. Eris hesitated, then knelt briefly beside Bolt. Stay sharp, she whispered. Show them what you can do. With a final scratch behind his ears, she moved to the designated area. First assessment, threat response simulation, Kalen announced, activating a control panel. From a panel on the wall emerged what appeared to be a standard security drone, similar to those used throughout Confederacy space. It hovered silently for a moment, then suddenly accelerated directly toward Eris's position. Bolt's reaction was immediate but controlled. He positioned himself squarely between Eris and the approaching drone, his stance low and stable. A warning bark echoed through the chamber, deep and authoritative rather than frantic. He didn't lunge or snap at the drone, maintaining his defensive position with focused intensity. The drone halted abruptly just short of Bolt's position, hovering in place. Bolt maintained his stance, a low growl now rumbling in his chest, but made no move to attack the stationary threat. Interesting, Kalen noted, lights flickering across the crystalline surface. Protective positioning priority. Warning vocalization rather than immediate aggression. Maintained restraint when the threat ceased advancing. The Xyler manipulated several controls, recording data. However, note the elevated adrenal response and the neural activity in the limbic system. Classic predatory activation patterns, albeit regulated by frontal cortex override. Forelag made a dismissive gesture. The creature defaults to aggressive posturing. That it didn't attack immediately merely indicates training, not nature. The point of training, Era's call from her position, is to provide control over natural responses. Every sentient being has instincts. Civilization is built on our ability to govern them. Kalen's body pulsed with what might have been amusement. An astute observation, Captain. Let us proceed to the second assessment. The drone retreated, and the room reconfigured again. Multiple panels rose from the floor, each bearing different colored lights and control interfaces. Problem-solving under pressure, Kalen explained. Your companion must activate the correct sequence of panels based on visual and auditory cues, while environmental stressors are introduced. What followed was a complex puzzle that would have challenged many humans. Lights flashed in patterns across the panels, accompanied by tones of varying pitch. The sequence changed unpredictably, requiring constant adaptation. Meanwhile, the room's lighting began to pulse erratically, and a low-frequency vibration thrummed through the floor. Bolt approached the challenge methodically. He watched the patterns carefully, his ears swiveling to track the auditory cues. When the first sequence became clear, he moved quickly to press his paw against the correct panel, then pivoted to catch the next cue. Despite the disorienting lights and sounds, he maintained focus, completing increasingly complex sequences with remarkable accuracy. After several minutes, Kalen into the test. Exceptional cognitive processing. Your companion demonstrates pattern recognition, working memory, and adaptive response capabilities well beyond standard parameters for his species. Even Forelag seemed somewhat impressed, though he quickly masked it. The enhancements are more extensive than the documentation suggested. Such processing capability in a predatory organism raises security concerns. Or, Eris countered, it demonstrates that he's capable of understanding and following complex instructions, making him more reliable, not less. Kalen intervened before the argument could escalate. Let us proceed to the final assessment. Interspecies social interaction. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a small enclosure containing several small, furry creatures with 6 legs and large, luminous eyes. Native Zorian fauna, apparently harmless and curious by nature. These are Ziktiks, Kalen explained. Herbivorous, non-aggressive social creatures indigenous to Zoria. They have no natural predators resembling canines, so their responses will be unbiased by evolutionary fear responses. The enclosure opened, allowing the Ziktiks to enter the main chamber if they chose. Bolt remained where he was, watching the small creatures with evident interest but making no move toward them. Gradually, one of the bolder Ziktiks ventured out, sniffing the air cautiously. It moved in a zigzag pattern across the floor, eventually approaching Bolt's position. Bolt lowered his head slightly, ears forward with curiosity but not aggression. When the Ziktik came within a few feet, Bolt simply sniffed gently in its direction, then took a small step backward, allowing the creature more space. The Ziktik, apparently satisfied that Bolt posed no threat, began exploring the perimeter of the room, occasionally glancing back at the large canine with what seemed like curiosity rather than fear. Remarkable restraint, Kalen noted, recording the interaction. No predatory pursuit, appropriate distance maintenance, subtle communication of non-threatening intent. He's curious, but he knows they're not prey or threats, Eris explained. Bolt understands context. He's trained to differentiate between potential dangers, neutral entities, and allies. Kalen concluded the assessment, allowing the Zik-Tiks to return to their enclosure. The crystalline being's surface rippled with complex patterns as it analyzed the collected data. My preliminary findings, Kalen announced after several moments, indicate a highly intelligent, well-trained companion with exceptional control and adaptive capabilities. While his biological parameters exceed standard Zorian safety thresholds for unmodified canines, his behavioral responses demonstrate reliable cognitive governance of instinctual drives. Forlag stepped forward, his scales darkening slightly, a sign of irritation among Zorians. The data remains concerning. The biological metrics cannot be ignored. The creature's neural and biochemical responses still register as potentially unstable under Zorian classification systems. Classification systems can be flawed when applied across species, Kalen countered diplomatically. I would recommend continued observation in controlled environments rather than immediate quarantine. Unacceptable, Forlag insisted. The biological divergence alone requires isolation protocols under Section 47 of the Quarantine Directive. This is ridiculous, Eris interjected, rejoining Bolt at the center of the room. You're ignoring the actual behavior in favor of theoretical risk assessments based on biology. Bolt has just demonstrated intelligence, restraint, and controlled responses in all your tests. The argument might have continued indefinitely if not for the sudden blaring of alarms throughout the facility. Red emergency lights began pulsing along the corridors outside. Station alert, announced the automated system. Power regulation failure detected in sectors 7 through 12. Backup systems engaged. Technical teams report to Central. Control. This is not a drill. Forlag's communication device activated. After a brief exchange in the rapid clicking language of Azorians, his scales paled significantly, a sign of alarm. There's a critical failure in the central power distribution hub, he informed Kalen. The biological research containment areas are operating on backup power, but the system is showing fluctuations. Kalen's crystalline form pulsed with urgent patterns. If those containment fields fail, we could have serious biohazard concerns. Forlag was already moving toward the door. I must report to the Emergency Coordination Center. Dr. Kalen, secure your research subjects and report to secondary control. As they hurried into the corridor, Eris and Bolt following close behind, the lights flickered ominously. Technical staff rushed past, their movements urgent but disciplined. What's happening? Eris asked, keeping pace with Kalen. The station's power grid operates on a complex distribution system, the Xyler explained, crystalline form glinting in the emergency lighting. A failure at the central hub could indicate a cascade breakdown. The Zorians excel at mechanical precision, but sometimes struggle with adaptive troubleshooting of nonlinear systems. They reached a junction where the corridor split into 3 branches. Zorian technical staff huddled around a diagnostic panel, their voices raised in agitated discussion. The data scrolling across the screens meant little to Eris, but the technician's body language conveyed clear concern. They can't isolate the source of the disruption, Kalen translated quietly. Too many contradictory signals in the system. Eris watched as Bolt focused intently on the diagnostic panel, his ears forward and head slightly tilted, a posture she recognized from countless problem-solving situations they'd faced together. Kalen, she said suddenly, Bolt might be able to help. How could a canine assist with power systems? The crystalline being's surface rippled with what might have been confusion. His enhanced sensory perception and pattern recognition. He can detect subtle variations in electromagnetic fields, temperature, and sound patterns that might not register on standard instruments. Eris gestured toward the frantic technicians. They're looking at individual data points, but Bolt might see a pattern they're missing. Kalen hesitated, facets shifting uncertainly. Inspector Forlag would not approve. Forlag isn't here, and we're facing a potential station-wide emergency, Eris countered. What harm could it do to let him try? After a moment's consideration, Kalen approached the lead technician, communicating in rapid pulses of light and sound. The Zorian initially reacted with dismissal, scales rippling with skepticism, but as the lights flickered again, more severely, reluctant agreement followed. "You have 5 minutes," Kalen told Eris. "The supervisor has authorized access to the secondary diagnostic console only." Eris nodded and led Bolt to the indicated panel. "All right, boy," she said quietly. "Find the pattern. Where's the problem?" Bolt approached the console, his nose twitching as he processed the combined sensory information. His ears swiveled independently, tracking subtle variations in the humming of nearby equipment. He moved slowly along the length of the console, pausing occasionally to focus on particular sections. The Zorian technicians watched with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope as the canine performed his unusual inspection. Eris remained silent, allowing Bolt to work without distraction. Suddenly, Bolt stopped, his attention fixed on a specific module near the bottom of the console. He gave a sharp, precise bark and nudged the section with his muzzle. "He's found something," Eris announced. "Check that module." The lead technician hesitated, then knelt to examine the indicated component. Using a specialized tool, he carefully removed the access panel. His upper eyes widened in surprise. "There is a device," he said in accented standard. "Not part of original system. Very sophisticated." Kalen moved closer, examining the discovery. A disruptor, designed to introduce random fluctuations into the power grid. This is deliberate sabotage. The technicians worked quickly to disconnect the foreign device, their earlier skepticism forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Within minutes, the emergency lights ceased their pulsing and the normal illumination returned to the corridors. "Central Hub reporting stabilization," announced one of the technicians, reading from a newly functional display. "Backup systems disengaging. Primary power restored to all sectors." Eris knelt beside Bolt, ruffling the fur behind his ears. "Good boy," she murmured. "Excellent work." Kalen's crystalline form pulsed with what Eris interpreted as approval. "Your companion's abilities are indeed remarkable, Captain Thorne. This intervention may have prevented significant damage to the station's sensitive research facilities." The lead technician approached, his scales shifting to a lighter hue, a sign of respect in Zorian body language. "The creature found what our diagnostics could not," he acknowledged. "Most unexpected." Eris was about to respond when another alarm sounded, different in tone from the previous emergency alert. "Containment breach in Research Sector 9, announced the automated system. Hazardous specimen loose. Security teams respond. Civilian personnel evacuate affected corridors immediately." The technician's communication device activated, and after a brief exchange, his scales darkened with concern. During power fluctuations, a specimen container was damaged. "A research animal has escaped into the maintenance corridors." "What kind of animal?" Eris asked, already suspecting she wouldn't like the answer. "A Verulian tree leaper," Kalen answered before the technician could respond. "Fast, agile, capable of climbing vertical surfaces. Not lethal, but it secretes a mild neurotoxin from specialized glands that can cause temporary disorientation. Difficult to track in complex environments," added the technician. "Security teams reporting inability to maintain visual contact in service tunnels." Bolt had already oriented toward one of the corridor branches, his posture alert, nose working actively to process the air currents. "He's picking up something," Eris said. "Bolt can track it." The technician looked uncertainly at Kalen, who pulsed with rapid decision-making patterns. "The security teams are struggling, and time is critical. If the specimen reaches residential areas." The crystalline being seemed to come to a conclusion. "I will take responsibility. Captain Thorne, your companion may attempt to locate the escaped specimen." "Forelag will object," warned the technician. "I will address Inspector Forelag's concerns later," Kalen replied firmly. "For now, our priority is containment." Eris nodded to Bolt. "Track," she commanded simply. Bolt moved immediately toward the maintenance corridor, his pace deliberate but urgent. Eris followed closely, with Kalen and 2 security personnel joining the impromptu search party. The maintenance corridors were a maze of narrow passages, dimly lit and crowded with conduits, pipes, and access panels. The ambient temperature was notably higher than in the public areas of the station, and the air carried the scent of lubricants and electronics. Bolt navigated the complex environment with confidence, pausing occasionally to sample the air before choosing a direction. The security personnel struggled to keep pace, encumbered by their equipment and less agile in the confined space. "How dangerous is this creature, exactly?" Eris asked Kalen as they rounded another corner. "The toxin causes temporary neural disruption, disorientation, mild hallucinations, impaired coordination. Not fatal, but potentially debilitating for several hours." The crystalline being's light patterns dimmed slightly. "The greater concern is triggering a panic if civilians encounter it unexpectedly." They emerged into a larger junction where several maintenance tunnels converged. Bolt stopped suddenly, his body tense, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "He's detected something," Eris whispered. As if in response, a blur of motion streaked across the ceiling of the junction. A lithe, six-limbed creature with iridescent scales and bulbous eyes. It moved with astonishing speed, leaping from one conduit to another before disappearing into a ventilation shaft. "There!" shouted one of the security officers, raising a capture device too late. Bolt was already in motion, racing toward the ventilation shaft. Instead of attempting to follow the creature inside, however, he stopped at the entrance, analyzing the air currents flowing from the opening. "He's tracking its path through the ventilation system," Eris explained. "These shafts must connect to other areas." Bolt suddenly changed direction, dashing toward another corridor. The search party followed, trusting the canine's instincts. They traversed several more passages before Bolt halted before a maintenance hatch, pawing at it insistently. "It must have exited the ventilation system here," Kalen surmised. The security officer carefully opened the hatch, revealing a dimly lit storage area filled with crates and equipment. Bolt entered cautiously, his movements now slow and deliberate. The others followed, spreading out to cover more ground within the confined space. A sudden rustling from behind a stack of crates alerted them to the creature's presence. Before anyone could react, the Verulian tree leaper burst from its hiding place, spraying a fine mist from glands near its throat. Eris felt the toxin hit her face, immediately triggering a wave of dizziness. She staggered backward, her vision swimming with peculiar colors and her sense of balance severely compromised. Through the disorientation, she saw Bolt dodge the spray with remarkable agility, keeping his focus on the fleeing creature. Rather than pursuing it directly, Bolt circled around the perimeter of the storage area, cutting off potential escape routes. His movement pattern was strategically sound, not attempting to catch the faster creature, but instead containing it within a diminishing space. The security officers, recovering from their initial surprise, moved to support Bolt's efforts, sealing the main exit and carefully advancing with their capture devices ready. The Verulian, finding itself increasingly cornered, made a desperate leap toward a ceiling vent. Bolt's bark echoed sharply through the chamber, not aggressive, but precisely timed to startle the creature mid-jump. The Verulian faltered, missing its target and landing awkwardly on a stack of containers. In that moment of vulnerability, the security officers deployed their energy net, successfully ensnaring the creature before it could recover. "Containment achieved," reported the lead officer, securing the captured specimen in a portable field generator. No injuries to personnel or the specimen. Eris, still fighting the effects of the neurotoxin, leaned against a wall for support. "Good work, Bolt," she managed, her voice slightly slurred. Kalen approached, assessing Eris's condition. "The effects will dissipate within approximately 2 hours. Medical can provide a neutralizing agent to accelerate recovery." "I'll be fine," Eris insisted, though the room continued to tilt unnervingly around her. "Bolt is the one who deserves the credit. He contained the situation without harming the specimen." The lead security officer, a Zorian who had not spoken until now, stepped forward. "The canine demonstrated impressive tactical awareness," he acknowledged. "Containment rather than pursuit." Strategic positioning. Calculated distraction at the critical moment. His scales shifted to a pattern that indicated professional respect. These are trained behaviors, not instinctual responses. Kalen's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been satisfaction. Indeed, I believe we have comprehensive data now for a final assessment. By the time they returned to the main section of the station, Eris had recovered sufficiently to walk without assistance, though the occasional wave of dizziness still passed through her. A small crowd had gathered in the central administrative hub, including Inspector Forlag and several senior station officials. Forlag's scales darkened with displeasure at the sight of Bolt walking freely beside Eris. "I was informed that your creature was involved in today's incidents," he said, his tone coldly formal. "Unauthorized activity in secure areas. Activity that saved your station from a serious power failure and helped capture an escaped specimen," Eris countered, standing straighter despite her lingering discomfort. "A formal review has been requested," stated one of the officials, a Zorian wearing the insignia of the station's executive administration. "Given the unusual circumstances, I have agreed to preside. Dr. Kalen will present the relevant data." They were escorted to a conference room where holographic displays had been prepared. Eris took a seat with Bolt settling calmly at her feet, while Forlag positioned himself on the opposite side of the table. Kalen stood near the main display, crystalline form refracting the ambient light in complex patterns. "I will present my complete assessment of the companion entity designated Bolt," Kalen began, activating the holographic systems. Three-dimensional models of Bolt's neural structure appeared, alongside comparative data from standard canines and other enhanced service animals. Initial scans confirmed biological parameters exceeding standard thresholds, Kalen continued, highlighting specific areas of the model. Enhanced sensory cortex, expanded cognitive processing centers, modified limbic system regulatory functions. These modifications raised legitimate concerns under Zorian classification guidelines. Forlag nodded in satisfaction, but Kalen wasn't finished. However, behavioral assessment revealed crucial distinctions between potential and actual response patterns. New data appeared, showing Bolt's neural activity during the various tests. In all simulations, frontal cortex activity consistently governed limbic response. In simple terms, conscious control overrode instinctual reaction. The display shifted to footage from the power system incident and the subsequent creature capture. More importantly, under genuine emergency conditions, the subject demonstrated not merely restraint, but advanced problem-solving, situational awareness, and tactical consideration that prevented harm to station systems and personnel. The administrative official leaned forward, scales shifting thoughtfully. "Your conclusion, Dr. Kalen? The classification high-risk feral organism is demonstrably inaccurate," Kalen stated firmly. "This entity functions as an intelligent partner with reliable behavioral governance, regardless of biological potential." The security officer who had witnessed Bolt's performance during the creature capture stepped forward. "I concur with Dr. Kalen's assessment. The canine's actions were calculated and controlled throughout the incident. It demonstrated restraint when aggression would have been faster but less effective." Forlag rose from his seat, his scales rippling with barely contained frustration. "The regulations are clear. Biological parameters exceeding safety thresholds require quarantine or removal. Exceptions create dangerous precedents. Regulations exist to ensure safety," the administrator replied evenly, "not to be applied blindly when evidence contradicts their underlying assumptions." "The creature remains an unpredictable variable," Forlag insisted, though his argument had lost much of its earlier conviction. "Its biological capacity for aggression cannot be denied." Eris stood, facing the assembled officials directly. "Every sentient being has the capacity for aggression," she said firmly. "What matters is how that capacity is controlled. Bolt has been my partner for 5 years. He's faced life-threatening situations countless times, and in every instance, he's demonstrated intelligence, restraint, and judgment." She looked down at Bolt, who sat calmly beside her, alert but relaxed. He's not a feral beast. He's a trained crew member, a partner, a companion who's proven his worth again and again. She met Forlag's four-eyed gaze directly. In short, he's a good boy. A very good, very well-trained boy. There was a moment of silence as the administrator considered both arguments. The Zorian's upper eyes closed briefly, a gesture indicating deep consideration. I have reviewed all evidence presented, the administrator finally announced. Based on demonstrable behavioral data and the extraordinary service rendered to this station today, I hereby revoke the classification of high-risk feral organism for the entity designated Bolt. Forlag's scales darkened, but he remained silent as the administrator continued. In its place, I am authorizing a special designation, Advanced Biological Support Partner. This classification permits free movement within designated areas of the station while accompanied by Captain Thorne. The administrator's scales shifted to a formal pattern. The documentation will be updated accordingly. Eris felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thank you, she said simply. Forlag gave a stiff nod of reluctant acceptance. The decision is noted. I will update our records. Despite his formal tone, it was clear he still harbored reservations. As they exited the conference room, Kalen approached them in the corridor. The crystalline being's surface rippled with subtle patterns that Eris was beginning to recognize as an expression of genuine respect. Your companion is truly remarkable, Captain Thorne, Kalen said. The bond between you represents a fascinating example of cross-species cooperation. I would be interested in further studying such partnerships, with your permission, of course. Maybe on our next visit, Eris replied with a smile. Right now, I think we both need some rest before getting back to our scheduled deliveries. As they made their way through the main concourse of the station, Eris noticed a subtle change in how the various alien species reacted to Bolt's presence. Where before there had been apprehension or outright avoidance, now there were curious glances and even a few respectful nods. Word of the day's events had clearly spread throughout the station. A young Zorian child, bolder than most, approached cautiously under the watchful eye of its parent. Bolt sat calmly, allowing the child to observe him from a safe distance. The child's scales rippled with excited curiosity rather than fear. Is it true? The child asked in halting standard. Did your animal find the hidden problem that our engineers couldn't see? Eris smiled. Yes, he did. Bolt is very good at seeing patterns that others miss. The child's parent inclined their head in a gesture of respect before gently guiding their offspring away. It was a small interaction, but symbolic of a larger shift in perception. When they finally returned to the nomad's fortune, Eris collapsed into her captain's chair with an exhausted sigh. Bolt settled beside her, resting his head on her knee. Not exactly the routine stopover we planned, was it? She said, scratching behind his ears. Bolt's tail thumped contentedly against the deck plating. But you showed them, didn't you? All those fancy scanners and classifications, and they still didn't understand what I've known all along. She leaned down, pressing her forehead gently against. Bolts, you're not just a trained animal. You're my partner, my crew, my family. Bolt whined softly, pushing his muzzle against her hand. And yes, absolutely the best good boy in this entire sector. As the ship's systems hummed around them, preparing for the next day's cargo operations, Eris found herself reflecting on the broader implications of the day's events. Perhaps their experience would lead to a re-evaluation of how the Zorians and other species viewed enhanced companions like Bolt. Maybe, in some small way, they had helped bridge the gap between different understandings of intelligence and partnership across the stars. Bolt yawned widely, apparently unconcerned with such philosophical matters. To him, the day had simply been another series of problems to solve, another opportunity to work alongside his human. As his eyes drifted closed, secure in the familiar environment of their ship, Eris smiled. Sleep well, partner, she whispered. We've earned it. The Nomad's fortune continued its orbital holding pattern above Zoria Stargate, its lights joining the countless others that illuminated the vast structure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cargo, new destinations. But for now, in the quiet hum of the ship's night cycle, captain and companion rested, their bond proven once again in the face of doubt and prejudice, stronger for having been tested among the stars.